Hi everybody, welcome back to Cars in Context. I'm your host, John Clor. Today we've got Joe Babiasz in the driver's seat for the topic of the day, and this one's going to be a tough one for you folks who own import cars to kind of understand what's happening to our economy and to our auto industry because of your vehicle selections. I'm going to talk today about the trade deficit and about the fact that fair trade, what we think is fair trade with our trade deals overseas, is not fair. There's no fairness in fair trade, and we're going to explain it to you how your choices, I know it's in a free country and you can buy anything you want, and that's the wonderful thing about being an American and being free. But you need to understand that while you make these choices, it really impacts the guy down the street. And even though that might not be in your industry, it's going to impact you, your neighbors, and your children for years to come. So to talk about this and to talk about how the Asian import auto industry has really kind of taken over a good percentage of what we used to do here in America, Joe Babiasz, welcome back to Cars in Context.
Hi, John.
Joe, I'm bringing you in for this because if anybody reads the Detroit News, if anybody knows, you've been on Fox 2 News, you've been out there preaching to the people that don't understand that the choices you make really do affect real life people. And there's a reason why I understand everybody went to the import route. We used to make some cars that were not so good, so you jumped over there. But now it's not a matter of quality anymore. Nope. Now we're actually beating all of our competition, quality and fuel economy and safety. And we've got the product now, and what happened is because of this perception of quality is elsewhere, or because of this perception of value, people are still exporting our wealth overseas, and they find no problem with it. Let's talk a little bit, Joe, about why fair trade isn't fair and why the Asian makes, in particular, the Japanese market. When you talk about fair trade with Japanese, I think I sell you a car, you sell me a car, and I'll give you all my products and let your people choose what they want. You give me your products and let us choose, and it's all fair and good. Is that the way it is, Joe?
It is not fair at all.
How did I know that?
Well, probably the one indicator would be that for every 120 cars that come from Japan to the U.S., imported to the U.S., one U.S. car gets imported to Japan.
So you're saying one, for every car we sell over there, they sell 120
cars.
So what's fair about that? Now,
nothing.
There's got to be a reason that is, Joe, and I know that our politicians, folks, they've made these fair trade agreements to supposedly help you. They serve you as our democratic society. They represent us in the world, and they're not making these decisions with your best interests in mind. Joe, when we are having that bad of a deficit, I remember seeing the tsunami in Japan and watching these cars wash away. Not a single car was recognizable as a U.S. brand. They just don't drive American cars over there.
They don't. Well, it's almost impossible to get an American car sold over there.
Now, why is that?
There's a couple of reasons. Primarily what they do is they're manipulating the yen, and what that does is make American cars much more expensive to purchase.
So an equal car, right size, same fuel economy, right, basically serves the same purpose, will be way more expensive to purchase because of the exchange rate.
Just because of manipulating the yen, absolutely. And another thing they do is they tack on silly requirements to imported cars that add additional cost, in some cases up to $8,000 or $10,000 in cost, just to get a car meeting their requirements. Right. And in many cases, these requirements have very little value. It's simply to keep out the imports. Right now, in total, there's only about a 5% penetration of imported cars to Japan. 95% are made in Japan, 5% come from elsewhere.
Unbelievable.
So,
so as much as you might hear about fair trade, you're saying that that's a protectionist market. So
absolutely.
I understand this. American car companies are not allowed to build a car factory in Japan. American car companies are not allowed to build a corporate dealership and sell their cars in Japan. We don't have the legal right to use their soil to build and sell cars there, but as you know, they're all over America.
They are all over America.
And we
basically graciously let them in, and they won't let us into their land.
All right, Joe, let's tackle this one right off the top. Okay. People will tell me, well, of course we let them in. If somebody wants to come into a factory, why wouldn't you let them come in with a factory and gives us all these jobs? What is not being communicated here is when a import factory opens up someplace and they take a piece of our market, the market in the United States is finite. It's a certain size. That means if the domestic market loses this amount of sales to an import maker, that means a domestic factory has to close. And so if you go back 10 years, I understand that the auto industry has shrunk almost 40%, even with the influx of all of these factories from overseas, because the support of the factory worker, for every one factory worker, there's 7 or 8 other employees, and they're overseas designing the cars, doing the marketing. They're the executives in charge in Japan or in Korea. So those people are being supported by your purchase, but they don't work or live here. So the net consequence of all these new factories here is we're shrinking our own auto industry.
That's a very, very valid point, John. And as an example, let's just use the Ford Wayne assembly plant.
Okay.
Looking at the economic impact of a plant, one plant.
One plant, okay.
To the state of Michigan, that one plant brings in $3 billion of gross product, about $1.8 billion every year, about $1.8 billion in payroll.
Each year?
Each year. It employs 5,000 people directly and about 24,000 people indirectly. That's one plant. So when you look at it to suggest to a potential buyer, do you want to buy an import, or do you want to buy domestic? Do you want to buy a car that's built here in Michigan versus something that's built in Japan or Europe? If we can start educating people to understand that if for every car you buy here, we can start opening another Wayne assembly plant. Right. Ford can, or GM can start opening another plant, or even Chrysler. And the more plants we have open, the more people are working, the more taxes are paid, everybody wins.
Well, what about this one? They'll say to you, okay, so it's $1.8 billion here in the Detroit area, right down here on Michigan Avenue. But what about this, Joe? What about, I'm not in the auto industry. I don't care. So who cares about the $1.8 billion in payroll?
Well, everybody better care about it, because
well, what if I own a flower shop?
It's the flower shop, it's the restaurants, the donut shop, everywhere around an assembly plant, and even some cases not around an assembly plant. They might
somewhere else.
They might order up flowers from the 1-800 flower line, but it's still, coming from some local person that's going to send money somewhere in America.
So the point is, folks, this billions of dollars that are put into these auto workers' pockets are spent in Detroit because they live here. They may not have to live downriver or in Wayne. They could commute in from Flint. They could come in from Port Huron or Grosse Pointe or anywhere. The point is that this is money in our community. They're spending their money in your community. So if you're opening a business, a restaurant, if that plant doesn't live here, if we don't support that plant, if the plant is in Japan and you're buying a car that's built overseas, or even built here that the exporting the profits overseas, the money is not in our pockets. We can't think of, I look at it as your wallet, Joe. If you have money in your wallet and you export, send out more than you take in, which our deficit is, what happens to the money in your wallet?
It goes away.
It's empty.
It is empty.
You can't keep sending out more money than you take in. And that's why we say it in the business. It's the deficit, stupid.
And it's more than just local, though. It's most importantly local, but it's the people of the big three, as an example, that might take a vacation to Florida, might take a vacation to California. They're gonna spread their money around throughout America. So if you're buying a car built in Japan, that money's not here. It's over there. And to some extent, to a lesser extent, if you buy an imported car that might be produced in America, all that profit goes over to Japan. It's not a 100% win-win for everybody.
It isn't, and people don't seem to get that. Here's another thing we should talk about. Now let's talk about that's just the Japanese market, pretty much closed to us. They've been here for 50 years. Honda and Toyota just celebrated 50 years in America. So for 50 years, folks, when you bought your Toyota, you've been exporting your wealth overseas. The profit from that, now if it were a profit neutral situation where we just worked, we built their car and they got the profits for it, which is what happens. We're building them here, we get paid for it, and then they get the profit. That's one thing, but it's not profit neutral. We've exported billions upon billions in the last 50 years in just Japanese makers alone. In Toyota, just pick Toyota. Multi-billion dollars per year for 50 years. That is of your wealth that you've exported somewhere else. That is not here. That went over, and they could do with it what they want. Now, the joke in the auto industry is Toyota's got more money than Oprah. But now let's talk about another Asian maker. What's really happened to the American market, the exploding Asian maker, is the Koreans. Mm-hmm. Now they've got, I understand the same thing happens in Korea, only it's tariffs, import duties. They wanted to have a free trade act, a fair trade act. They wanted in on it. So then we passed this law, 2 years ago. The Koreans, folks, are selling between 400 and 600,000 cars in our market every year. What do we sell in Korea, Joe? We sold about
a very small amount.
About 2,500 Fords and about 3,000 GM products as opposed to hundreds of thousands of cars. And those cars, folks, are that again, exporting, it's the trade deficit. German cars. What's the deal now? You buy a German car, we love our Mercedes and our BMWs and our Audis, but the Germans over there have a tariff system, and they also have a tax on displacement.
Right.
So how are we penalized there?
We're penalized big time. I think we talked earlier, it's as much as $19,000 tariffs for some domestic cars going over to Germany. It's based on their cubic inch size, how large the engine is, how many horsepower, how much horsepower the car has, and a variety of things that makes it almost impossible to sell a car over in Europe. I mean, people do buy them,
yeah,
but they don't buy them in bulk. They don't buy a lot of them.
Well, think of it this way, folks. If you had a 3.5-liter V6 in your American car and you tried to buy that same car, a mid-sized family sedan, overseas against the German cars, they would tack $19,000 on it because you're over 2 liters in displacement. So then the decision over there, you have these two comparable cars, a Volkswagen Passat and say a Ford Fusion. Well, why would I pay $20,000 more for the exact same car? So they don't buy the American cars over there. Now, so it's not fair trade again.
I agree.
We're not tacking $19,000 in taxes on every German car that we import.
No, we don't.
All right, so the argument, folks, people don't seem to get it. It is a free country. You can buy what you want. But we will save the whales, we'll save the boat people, we'll walk 500 miles for breast cancer, we'll make sure dolphins aren't in our tuna, but we won't help our neighbor keep his job, to keep our neighborhood going and keep our business going, because we selfishly think that, well, I'll just buy anything I want, and it doesn't affect it. As long as I'm happy, that's all that matters. I think when we start realizing our purchase decisions, this is like what you eat affects your health, what we purchase affects the health of our economy.
Absolutely.
So, Joe, what's this new, Japan wants to get into the new fair trade agreement. It's up before Congress now.
TPP, Trans-Pacific
So what's the
organization.
They just basically want a better deal than they have now?
They want a better deal than they have. There's an 11-nation organization that started about 2 years ago, and we're trying to get free trade with these free trade agreement with these 11 nations. Japan just visited the White House a short time ago.
Yeah, they went in.
Asking President
Better
Obama to, hey, help me out. But Mr. Obama is getting a lot of pressure from the House and the Senate, as well as Ford employees who recently sent 40,000 signature petition to the White House. I don't think it said that they didn't want Japan in there. They just wanted it to be. They wanted it to be fair.
Yeah.
So let's make it fair, and we'll talk about it. Interestingly, though, of the 11 nations, all the nations put out an agreement that they would not allow a nation in if that nation boxed in a particular segment of their economy, like Japan with the autos.
Right.
But on the other hand, 8 of the 11 nations have already agreed to let Japan in to the organization. I don't know why they would suggest Japan should get in, but 8, including, by the way, Canada and Mexico, are part of those 8 nations. So,
folks, they're working on it. We've got to watch this closely. Write your congressman and understand that the job that you save may be your own or your neighbor's. Help us out by making smarter decisions. Follow the money. If the money stays here, it's a good thing. If the money's exported, your wallet's going to be empty, and so is ours. Joe, let's stay on top of this topic.
Thanks, John.
Unfortunately, we got a break from that. It's already time for one of my favorite segments on Cars in Context. It's time for Pride My Ride.
Yes, it is.
All right, this time we're going to use a Pride My Ride that Joe brought in, a friend of his with a really unique car and a unique story. Joe, why don't you take us through it?
Sure. This is called an Amphicar. Interesting car owned by Paul Rasmussen of Rochester Hills. Paul's a friend of mine.
Okay.
Great guy. He loves this car. He's owned it since 1989. The Amphicar is a car that will go both on land and on the water.
Isn't it in James Bond?
I don't know. It might have been. When it was produced from '62 to '67 in Berlin, Germany. It cost about $4,000 at that time, which was about the price of a Corvette.
Yeah.
This was not a cheap car by any means. And over those years, they built about 4,500, of which 3,700 came to the United States.
Wow.
In the back, you don't see it here, but in the back below the bumper, there's 2 propellers.
Yep. Drive right in the lake.
Yeah.
Right down the launch into the lake.
It was powered by a Triumph Herald engine with about 40 horsepower.
Oh,
it went about 70 on land and about 8 knots on the water. Had a 4-speed land transmission, and you use 2 speeds in the water.
Wow.
I've had the pleasure of being in Paul's car.
Joe, not in the
lake,
water, tell me.
You
were in the lake with this?
I was, and it's a very, here it is. Well, it's a very eerie, you're sitting there going, this isn't right. You know, I really shouldn't be sitting in a car in the lake.
Oh.
This is a photo of Paul in Holland.
That looks like it's off St. Clair Beach.
No, that was actually in Holland.
It's off Brownies on the lake up there, I think. Somebody drove off the end of the pier.
Paul was living in Germany and shipped the car over to Germany, where he restored it and took it for a ride with a group of amphicar enthusiasts in one of the canals in Holland. Interestingly, he's the only American that's ever been allowed into the Amphicar Club of Berlin.
Wow.
And it's not because, you know, as you know, in America, you want to join a car club, you don't even need a
money.
car.
Yeah.
In that club, you have to, there's some requirements. You have to be able to speak German. You have to live in Germany. You have to have worked on your car, and you need 2 sponsors to agree to let you get into the club. So he was allowed in the club. He's the only American that's ever been in the club. He has a very unique honor.
That's a cool honor, folks. That is so. He's the kind of guy you will drive it and you will like it.
Exactly.
If you have a car that you want
cool
in your pride and ride, send a note to me, Jay Clor at carsandcontext.com, and we'll be sure to get it on the air. You wouldn't believe this, Joe. I think the rumor is we do have some viewer mail. Lauren Parrott. Lauren, is there any possibility we have viewer mail for today's show as well? We want to get to it.
I think we do.
You do, John.
Yes. Thank you, folks, for sending in that. Well, thank you much.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren.
You're welcome.
All right, folks, we do have viewer mail today. Joe, why don't you take one, and I'll take the other.
All right. This first one comes from Andrew C. in Berkeley, who watches Cars in Context on ATTU versus Channel 99.
Okay, yep.
Dear Joe, I heard that the GM Holden updated the Commodore range that's designed and built in Australia, and that a version of the rear drive Commodore would be exported to the U.S. and sold as a low-volume sports sedan.
Yeah, we saw that just recently.
Yeah. He said when I was watching coverage of the Daytona 500, he saw race car driver Danica Patrick took pole position in a racing version of the new SS shortly before it was revealed as a production version. Can you tell me if this SS is a redesigned Holden Commodore, or is it an all-new Chevy? Well, it is a rebadged or redesigned.
Well, it looks
Holden.
a little different.
It does look a little different. It is not the Chevrolet. It's based off the shorter version of the Zeta platform.
Okay.
The new Caprice cop car is the larger version of the Zeta. It's a front-engine, rear-drive car. It's going to be a great car, though. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's powered by the. It will be powered by the 6.2-liter LS3 engine.
That's a great motor.
Great motor with 415 horsepower. At this point, they're saying only a 6-speed automatic, so there's no manuals available at this time, and should hit the dealer showrooms about the 4th quarter of the year.
Yeah, it's going to be, it's nothing wrong with building a global platform and bringing it here. I've got one too, Joe. This one comes to us from Jake R. in Harper Woods, who watches Cars in Context on WOW. That's Channel 10 and WOW Cable. John, I read in the Wall Street Journal that Chinese automaker Geely is expected to dump Volvo, not because sales are going nowhere, but because after years of owning it, they've absorbed all the technology and now they don't need the technology anymore. Is it true that the Chinese bought Volvo only to raid the intellectual property? Folks, I really think we need to do a show on this. The answer is absolutely yes. That's the only reason you'd buy that company, to take the technology. Volvo fans, I hope that's not true, but I bet you it is. Folks, if you've got a question you'd like for us to answer here on Cars in Context, send it to me, Jay Clor at carsandcontext.com. Joe, we're out of time again. Thanks again for coming. We'll do it again sometime soon. Folks, remember, knowledge is power. So until next time, I'm your host, John Clor, and thanks for watching.